Hello, everyone. Welcome to our simulator assignment video for Chapter 12 in our book. So Chapter 12 was all about understanding approach plates. And in this chapter, Rod talks a lot about an ILS. He kind of leads you through an ILS and how that works. And then he also talks about some other kinds of approaches that are not GPS approaches. So there was some requests at our meeting last time for a DME arc. People were asking about DME arcs and some approaches that have DME arcs. So for this assignment, I'm going to have you guys fly an ILS, and I'm also going to have you fly a VOR DME approach. So for the ILS, I had a couple places to pick from, and I decided to pick from Williamsport, not just because it's very close, but also because its ILS had some features that we haven't talked about yet. So I've already pulled up the approach plate. Of course, I got this off of AirNav, and let's just go ahead and brief this approach. So the first task I would like you guys to try with your simulators is to fly the ILS to runway 27 at Williamsport. So briefing this approach, it's Williamsport, Pennsylvania, localizer DME, IPT, frequency 110.1, TACAN channel 38. The approach course is 266 degrees. The runway landing distance is 6,063. Touchdown zone elevation is 527. Airport elevation 528. So remember that touchdown zone elevation is the highest elevation in the first 3,000 feet of the runway. ICT and ICA. And there's also something new, which I'm not really going to talk about. It's talking about temperatures. And it says, INOP table does not apply to straight-in ILS 27. So in your book, Rod talks about things like, if you have INOP equipment, how does that change your minimums for an ILS? And in the case of this approach, it does not. Circling not authorized south of runway 9 and southwest of runway 30. Well, why is that? Well, if you've ever flown into Williamsport, you know exactly what it is. There is a massive mountain right here. So you don't want to fly into that. What else are they telling us? Circling for runway 12 or 30, not authorized at night. Okay, that's also obvious. Runway 27, helicopter visibility reduction below 3/4 of a statute mile, not applicable, and DME is required. They have Mauser lights. And here's our missed approach procedure. Climb to 980, then climbing right turn to 4500 on heading 290. And on MIP Vortac, radial 314 to Zimmel intersection, which is 19.1 DME from FQM, and hold. Continue climb in hold to 4500. Then, if we look at our third briefing section, we see all of our frequencies. ASOS 125.225. By the way, if you've ever flown into Williamsport, you might have also noticed that if you're coming from Bloomsburg, sometimes you have to be right on top of that airport to get the ASOS because it's past this big hill. Now, something else. Notice that they don't have an ATIS, even though it's a towered field. It's somewhat unusual, but it's just the way that it is. New York Center, you talk to them as you're coming in, because unlike Wilkes-Barre, they do not have their own approach departure control. So they're kind of like the lowest level towered field, if you will. They have just a tower and they have the little airspace around it, but they do not have approach departure control and such. Okay, and then they have the tower frequencies, 119.1 for us, 257.8 if you're military, and the lights are controlled on 119.1. It's also the CTAF when the tower is closed. How do you know when the tower is closed? You look at the supplement, and it will tell you the hours of the tower. Ground control, 0.9er, 121.9, pretty common ground control frequency. And their Unicom is 122.95. Now recall, for a towered field, that Unicom means this is the people that you call when you want fuel and such. Right? So, Bloomsburg, our Unicom frequency is also the CTAF, but that's not true when you go to the towered fields. Okay, moving on. When we look at the plan view here, things look a little different. Now notice it tells you straight up RNAV1, GPS, or radar and DME required. So they're telling you, what do you need in order to fly this approach? They had it in the small type up here in the briefing, but they're going to repeat that down here just to make sure that if you don't have the right equipment, you can't fly this approach. Okay, so here's a couple of things that are different. We've got the localizer, 110.1. Remember we said that a localizer will always be on an odd 10th. And here's the identifier IPT, TACAN channel 38, as we said. Here's the feather, shaded part on the right, indicating it is a normal ILS. It's not a localizer back course or anything like that. And we have the bold lines that show the normal path, dashed lines which show our missed approach. You'll see here's the river. And of course, if I look this way, I see some really high elevations, 2333, 2098. And that is why I can't circle to the south. All right, other things to notice. So here's our normal path. You'll see that there are a couple of initial approach fixes. ZECNO says IAF here, and here it's Hulro from the south. So what's unusual about this? I don't see a holding pattern reversal. I don't see a procedure turn reversal either. So to fly this ILS, again, this one's a little bit different from some that you might have seen in the book. You have to go to one of these fixes and then you fly straight in. And then you just turn when you get to the localizer. You're going to intercept the localizer at JIBGO and fly in from there. So another thing that's a little different, we've seen MSAs in a little box in the corner. We don't see that here. Instead, we see kind of this newer style information. Now, this is something when we start talking about GPS approaches soon, you'll notice that this is pretty common for a GPS approach. This style of saying, hey, how high do you have to be? So in this sector here, and it's telling you how that's defined, 30 nautical miles to ZECNO. You have to be at 4,300 or above. And over here, you have to be at 4,300 or above. And this is interestingly not the same fix. Notice this is JIBGO. Right, so this one is referencing to this fix. This one's referencing this intermediate fix. And then this one down here is referencing Holru. So it's a little bit weird. The other thing that's a little bit weird is they all say 4,300 feet. And as we've seen before, you have all of your obstacles around this. And then over here in the corner, you'll see the missed approach fix. And you might say, well, why is this over here in the corner? That's because this thing's quite far away. Notice it says this is 19.1 from Zimmel. I'm sorry. That's the Zimmel intersection, which is 19.1 miles away. And it's telling you, it's 19.1 miles away from FQM over here. And then there's MIP. That's the Milton VOR that's kind of close to Bloom over here. So it's out there a ways. And that's why it's in its own little box. We've talked about the fact that sometimes there's a circle and everything inside the circle is to scale. This is kind of another way of doing that, where if you have something that is not, to scale, if you will, there's just the one thing. So it would be kind of silly to have a circle around everything except for this one missed approach fix. So instead of doing it that way with the circle, they just said, okay, you know what? We're going to put everything in the big box, make it to scale, and we'll put a little inset for this thing that is not going to fit in that box. All right. Now, when we get down here, here's something that you might notice. Normally, the aerodrome sketch is there on the right, but this one happens to be on the left, which is a little bit unusual. So here's our airport, elevation 528, touchdown zone elevation 527, showing your approach path coming in, straight down runway 27. And it is 9.8 miles from the final approach fix to the runway. They have PAPI lights on all of the runways, it seems. They're also telling you a little bit more about the lighting down here in the corner. Then we look at our profile view and notice the icons are telling you climb to 980, climbing right turn on a heading of 290 to 4500. Go to the MIP 314 radial, go to Zimmel and hold. And you might recall it says, hey, keep on climbing in the hold. Because you're probably not going to make it all the way up to 4,500 by the time that you get there. Well, it depends on what you're flying, I guess. So, here we go. This is our profile view. And we start at JIBGO, 4,300. We can drop down to 3,700 if we're doing the localizer only at Zamev. And then there's some more step down fixes there. Another visual descent point, 4.1 miles out. And our missed approach point is at 1.2 miles from the localizer. Now you might say, why is it 1.2 from the localizer? Because the localizer, recall, is on the other end of the runway. And how long's the runway? Well, the runway is 68.25. So the runway is a little more than a mile long, a nautical mile, that is. All right. Other things, notice that I have the lightning bolt and the Maltese cross at the same intersection. Lightning bolt is where we intersect the glide slope. We should be at 3,700 feet at that intersection on the glide slope. So it's telling you all of that. The glide slope is standard 3 degrees with a threshold crossing height of 48 feet. Here are all the distances to those fixes. And then finally down here we have our minimums. If we're coming in straight in ILS 27, it doesn't matter what category you have. Your minimum altitude is 777 and 3/4 miles visibility. That is 250 feet above the ground. And if you were military, you'd have 300 feet on your radar altimeter and 3/4 miles visibility. If you're doing the localizer only approach, then you're a lot higher, 1,500. And if you're doing a circling approach, you're also at 1,500 unless you're fast. And then you're way up at 1,840 or 2,060. And of course, you can't circle to the south of this runway because you'd be circling into a mountain, and that's not good. So that is the ILS or localizer runway 27 approach into Williamsport IPT. So that's task 1. Task 2. I was looking to try to find an approach that involved a DME arc and an ILS, and I didn't really find anything in the state of Pennsylvania. I think the closest I found something was maybe in Massachusetts, kind of somewhere up in this general area, but not anything really close. Now, of course, you're saying, well, but I have a simulator. True. You could try to, fly there in your sim, but I thought it would be more interesting to talk about an approach that you could actually fly in an aircraft, right? Because remember, what's my recommendation? I like to fly sim. I think that's one of the best ways that you can learn how to fly IFR. Okay, so if I look at the VOR DME runway 8 approach down in Lancaster, what does that look like? I have a DME arc. And I have 2 choices on how I get on this arc. 2 different entry points, if you will. So let's go ahead and brief this one as well. So this is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. VOR DME, frequency 117.3, TACAN channel 120. Approach course is 090. The runway landing distance, 6118. Touchdown zone elevation, 399. Airport elevation is 403. They have alternate minimums or departure procedures, and the A says they have non-standard alternate minimums as well. It says night landing runway 1331 not authorized. INOP table does not apply when local altimeter setting not received. Use Harrisburg. International altimeter setting and increase all MDA 80 feet. And S8 and circling CAT C and D visibility 1/4 mile. Once again, they have Mauser lights. Missed approach, climb to 1200, then climbing left turn to 3000 via LRP, VOR, DME. Radial 333 to Cups intersection on the 12.5 DME off of LRP and hold. Okay, last briefing section, ATIS. So they actually have ATIS, unlike Williamsport, which had ASOS. And unlike AVP, their ATIS is on a normal comm frequency. It's not on a VOR nearby. So 125.675, Harrisburg approach control, 126.45. Lancaster Tower, 120.9. It's also the CTAF. Controls the lights when they're closed. You know that they close because there's a star after the tower. Remember, star means part-time. That's kind of a universal thing on charts. Ground control is actually 0.8, not 0.9er. And Unicom 122.95. Okay, looking at the plan view. Here's our approach. We're coming into runway 8. And notice, as I said, there are a couple of places where you might begin this. If you're coming from Bloomsburg, you'd probably pick up this fix, and this is where you would start your DME arc. And if you were coming from the south, you would probably use Jonger instead of Weiland. It's an 11-mile arc, which is a little bit odd, but there's probably a reason for that. Normally they're like 10 or 15, but there was probably a good reason to have a different length arc. So we have our two initial approach fixes. Our intermediate fix is Vaduk. And then we also have a fix here at Nunts and Tubai right at the end of this. This is all based off the Lancaster VOR 117.3. My missed approach is way up here. I'm going to do this hold. And what else can we say about this? If we look, we'll notice that our MSA is back in the little circle. So we have to be above 3,000 in this region and 2,600 to the south, east. At the profile view, once again, we have our icons. Our missed approach, climb 1,200. Then climbing left turn to 3,000, LRP radial 333. Go to Cups and hold. So here it is. You climb, then you start your turn, then you fly this radial up here and you hold. Now, some of you might say, well, this hold doesn't set me up to re-enter this approach. Well, no, it doesn't, because you probably need to fly a different approach or go somewhere else if you had to go missed. And that's why. I've seen much worse, by the way. I have seen some missed approach holds that are 25 or 30 miles away when I was flying out in Iowa. So this is actually not that bad. Okay. So we start at 2,500 feet. Then we get to drop down to 1,800. You'll notice there's a slightly shallow glide slope, if you will, 2.99 degrees. Threshold crossing height of 45 feet. Here are our final fixes. We've got 1.7 DME, and then Tubai is at 1 mile DME, where it's like, if you don't see it by then, you got to go missed. Straight in, 820 and 1 mile, which is 421 feet up. Unless you're going faster than 1.25 miles. Circling is not that much higher, 940. So even their circling approach is way lower than what you're going to get in Bloomsburg and some of the places around here. Here's our aerodrome sketch, elevation 403, and it's Class D airport, Class D airspace. Touchdown zone elevation 399. Here's your approach path. Notice it's not necessarily aligned with the runway because here's the VOR. The VOR is kind of like over this way. They can't put the VORs in the middle of the runway. They haven't figured out that technology just yet. All right. And they're showing you the lighting. There's PAPIs on all of these runways as well, except for, looks like runway 31 has a VASI, but the rest of them have PAPIs. More about the lighting, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So those are the two things I want you guys to try for this chapter. Now, of course, there are tons of other kinds of approaches, and we haven't gotten to GPS approaches yet, but let's see how we do. So I'll go ahead and fly these two approaches real quick and show you what it kind of should look like. Hopefully I'll do okay with these. And for the DME arc, I'll try to talk you guys through it and tell you a little bit more about how this works. So let's